we need to talk about global connections today. We need to talk about American issues, take two. And we want to talk about Belarus today. And we have Ralph Winnie in Washington, D.C. We have our co-host, Tim Apicella, and Stephanie Dalton here on Take Two. And the subject is Belarus. And when we come back, we're going to drill down on what's happening there. Okay, welcome to the show, Ralph Winnie, Tim Apicella, Stephanie Dalton. Let's talk about Belarus. The first question, Ralph, is where is Belarus in terms of the war in Ukraine? Where does it stand? And let me tell you that the name Lukashenko does pop up.
Yeah. Well, the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, has been an active supporter and proponent of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they have allowed their country to be used as a staging ground for Russian troops to go into and try and occupy Ukraine. So this morning, I was with the head of the Belarus opposition, Valery Shepkalo and Dmitry Balkanets, who gave a major presentation at the National Press Club discussing their situation in Belarus. They are both Dmitry Balkanets and Valery Shepkalo are actively involved with the democracy movement to try and force an election where all the people.
Let's hold there. Yeah. Let me ask you about that. What we have read, what it seems to be, is that Alexander Lukashenko is in charge, and he's real buddies with Putin. And that's what I mean. This kind of photograph been out for a long time, and Putin has control over him, and he'll do whatever Putin wants. But you're saying there's a democratic movement also, and they oppose this relationship between Lukashenko and Vladimir.
Yeah. Yes, there are many opposition leaders that have been jailed in Belarus and or driven out of the country. Valery Shepkalo is living in Greece with his wife. Valery Shepkalo was the former Belarus ambassador to the United States back in the early 2000s. He left in 2002. And he has been leading a grassroots movement. So Valery Shepkalo and Dmitry Balkanets have been leading the Belarus opposition, trying to promote civil society, democracy-related reforms in Belarus so that Lukashenko will be forced to hold an election, that is free and fair, where they can have international observers and they can have a movement that will force what is otherwise known as a dictatorship to hold free and fair elections. So we hosted Dmitry and Valery at the National Press Club this morning in Washington, D.C., where they were able to lay out and discuss a pathway for democratic reform in Belarus.
What chance do they have of succeeding?
It all depends on what the Biden administration is willing to do, how much pressure they're going to be able to put on Russia in terms of the situation in Ukraine. There's a lot of support, obviously, for Ukraine. But Belarus is not getting enough attention because the dictator, and I call him a dictator because that's what he's been called by the rest of the world. There are actually U.S. sanctions on Belarus, so they don't have an official ambassador here in the United States. And we're trying to draw attention to the growing opposition to the government in Belarus, to force them to recognize and acknowledge that there are many people in their country that want to have democratic reforms. They want to start with a new election.
So when Dmitry and Valerie go back, are they going to be met by flowers or jail term?
Well, they would be met by jail term. That's why they can't go back. That's why they are in exile, as are many of the Belarusian activists right now,
Okay,
including many athletes.
Tim, you have some questions for Ralph?
I do. I don't work in the State Department, but there's an old saying: if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. So, we have Lukashenko basically saying that Belarus is an independent nation of Russia, yet we have Belarus to allow Russian troops and equipment on their sovereign lands and territory. They have joint war battle maneuvers that they've conducted. They've conscripted medical doctors to take care of the Russian wounded and those Russians that are sick. At what point does the facade of independence kind of break away and dissipate?
Well, you're seeing that happen now. It's taking a lot of courage for the people of Belarus to stand up and want to have democratic reforms enacted in their country. And that's Valery Sipkalo and Dmitry Balkanets. They have been pounding the pavement here in Washington, D.C., meeting with the State Department, meeting with think tanks, and working with the America Eurasia Center to explain their cause to the American people and ask for their support and help in pushing Lukashenko to hold free and fair elections, to ensure that there's a civil society movement within the country. Because
Ralph,
as you correctly pointed out, Lukashenko is lockstep with Putin in providing, the land and also the military equipment, allowing them to stage, maneuvers out of Belarus into Ukraine.
Ralph,
This organization is the Forum of Democratic Forces of Belarus. Is that what it's called? Both Valerie and Dmitry are founders of that?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Hey, Jay, let me just get one more question in. Ralph, what's your opinion about this document allegedly that Germany's newspapers, Sweden's Yahoo News, Ukrainian newspapers, basically saying that Russia will annex Belarus by 2030? What's your take on that document?
It's plausible. I think there's a lot of concern within Belarus that something like that could happen. But part of Belarus is, if people recall Chernobyl and the accident that happened there with the breakdown of the nuclear reactor. So you have part of that land that is just not very valuable, no natural resources because of what happened with Chernobyl. And the other part is marshland, wetland. So the land itself is not valuable per se. It is just the strategic location that is very important, for Russia's incursion into Ukraine. And Lukashenko is walking lockstep with Vladimir Putin and supporting him in that regard. At the same time, Lukashenko is not allowing the people of Belarus to be able to have a voice in how they want their country run. When there were previous elections, it was international observers who were able to be there on the ground who said that it was not free and fair, that it was orchestrated. Lukashenko was able to knock off anyone that really had experience, as who wanted to run as a candidate, and they would appoint figureheads or people that could not govern, even if by some chance they could get elected. So it was perceived as just a real sham, when Lukashenko was called elections. Now that you have growing opposition within the country and that there are so many activists are being forced to live and work abroad, there's more scrutiny now on what is going on in Belarus, and hopefully that is going to be taken to the next level. Valerie put together a proclamation asking Joe Biden to really ramp up the pressure on the Lukashenko government.
You know, there's another little piece of Russia just to the northwest of Belarus that also makes Belarus strategic. It's not only that Belarus is the capstone of Ukraine, but there's another piece of Russia that's right there on the Baltic, am I right?
Yes, that's correct. If you understand Putin's grand scheme, where he wants to recreate the former Soviet Union, so they say, and which I think is playing itself out, in their conflict in Ukraine. Certainly, Belarus is part of that plan, even though the country itself may not be as economically valuable as, say, some of the other former Soviet bloc countries. But the president of Belarus certainly, is a strong, confident, and friend of Vladimir Putin. And
well, we know. What about you, Stephanie? Do you have any questions for Ralph?
Yeah, Ralph, I understand that the border is relative. Well, it looks big on the map, but actually it's only about 550 miles of border, right? What kind of border is that? Is it easily permeable? I mean, obviously they're shooting stuff across it, right? So there are no mountains.
Russia has easy access to the border of Belarus, and they've been able to, amass equipment and soldiers, as part of their involvement in Ukraine.
Yeah. And it's rather tense now. I've read that the tension is building there between both sides with they're putting up the defenses and gathering their war, whatever.
The interesting thing is they don't use Belarusian troops. And the reason is they don't think the Belarusian troops would be very loyal to the cause. That the first chance they would get, they would just surrender because they would have no heart or stomach in a fight in Ukraine. So it's all Russian troops that are there.
Ralph, there are Belarusian troops in Ukraine in a special regiment of Belarusian troops fighting Russia, and presumably Belarus too, who are worried about what happens to them if they go back to Belarus.
No,
I mean, there's some mercenaries. I think the majority of the Belarusian troops don't really want to be part of the conflict, but they're sort of caught in the middle.
Is that why Lukashenko has made the statement that there will be no invasion? He has said Belarus will not invade Ukraine, except under one condition, which is if their own homeland is invaded. So if the Ukrainians do anything to go into Belarus, then they'll respond. Now, is that just a way to get himself a place to stand in line with Putin, to protect his own turf, but also show that he's willing to fight ultimately if they can arrange for an incursion?
I would agree with that. I think the Ukrainians, they obviously don't want to attack Belarus. They want to just repel any foreign invaders, off of their territory.
It's more likely that the statement he made, that Lukashenko made, is only for now, because as we know, Putin, lies and changes his mind about what he promised. So Lukashenko may find himself high and dry on that.
He could throw Lukashenko under the bus anytime. Absolutely.
Well, in a sense, he is, step by step. This paper that came out about how Putin wanted to take Belarus within 5 or 6 years. That's really a stick in the eye to Lukashenko as the leader of Belarus. But I think Putin could make Lukashenko go away instantly, overnight. Remember what happened in Ukraine in 2014. When the puppet guy was thrown out of the country and went immediately to Moscow to confirm, that he worked for Putin.
Putin demands loyalty. There's no question. And Lukashenko's days could be numbered. A lot of it will depend on the growing opposition I think, in Belarus because Lukashenko is so heavy-handed.
Yeah. Well, even if Lukashenko leaves for one reason or another, that doesn't stop Putin's plan. And just as it didn't stop Putin's plan in Ukraine, I mean, he kept on going. And
Yeah.
he's got a lot of agents and provocateurs on the ground now in Belarus who would continue to fight for Russia, even if Lukashenko wasn't there. They might even be more aggressive. Tim, you got questions about the strange incident between Belarus and Poland, is it?
Well, I guess the question is, how should Poland look upon Belarus being so close to their border? And would they potentially start defenses along the border to Belarus? Is that something that's plausible?
Keeping in mind that right now that border is locked. It's frozen.
Right.
Correct.
No traffic is moving on that on the highways there.
But the question is, would there be Polish defenses that now need to be pointed in the Belarus's direction? I don't know if that's a good question to ask or not, but there it is.
Yeah, and maybe that was a question that was raised with Joe Biden, when he met with the leader in Poland, as part of the whole situation in Ukraine. Because at some point, Belarus is going to get dragged into this conflict. There could be fighting in Belarus, either from the Ukrainian side or Belarus the Belarusian army trying to go in, conscripted. So they're going to get drawn in no matter what. And I think it will be very interesting to see how Lukashenko wants to handle this. He said that he's not going to invade unless the Ukrainians try and come in and take control. And the Ukrainians don't want to do that. But there could always be some sort of situation, where something on the border gets triggered and, Belarus gets drawn into the conflict.
Yeah, call it a false
Ruff,
flag.
Yeah.
Ruff, let me, you mentioned the word conscription. What if Belarusians were conscripted similar to what Putin tried to do or did do with Russians of 300,000 conscripts? Would there be the same effect of those in Belarus to flee the country to avoid conscription?
I think you'd have that, sure, because they're not perceived necessarily as being the most loyal troops to the cause. And I think you would see a lot of people trying to leave, and it would probably push them in the hands of the pro-democracy movement being led by Valery Shepkalo and Dmitry Balkanets.
So, Ralph, the Ukrainians did not escape Ukraine to Belarus at all, right? Was there any contingent that went that way when they, a year ago when they were leaving? That was a border they could have crossed too, did they? Is there any...
Everyone went through to Poland.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And no one to Belarus. They didn't see it.
No, I don't. We don't hear any reports of that. Yeah.
Well,
what about...
say the name Belarus, it includes Rus, and Belarusian it includes Rus.
Yeah.
So the question really that I would throw in here is how faithful are the Belarusians to Russia? In other words, it's like in the Donbass. There's a lot of people who are of Russian extraction, speak the language and all that. We have the same circumstance in Belarus.
Certainly, there's an element of that, but I think the Belarusians are focused on bread and butter issues right now, and they don't want to get dragged into a conflict. The Belarusian people, they want to remain as neutral as possible, and they're chafing under the reign of Lukashenko. There's no question about that.
Well, Ralph, I understand that there's quite a contingent of women, Belarusian women, who are putting together humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
So they're trying to send food and clothing, and this is evidently a considerable effort on their part. They're very concerned about the people, especially in the Donbass. So is that going to be an irritant for Lukashenko? What's the circumstance surrounding that effort those women.
Yeah, I mean, Lukashenko shouldn't oppose something like that. I think he'd be kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because it's humanitarian, women. There's only so much he can do as far as repressing, all kinds of activity. So something like that, will probably go through, but it'll become more and more difficult, I think.
Mhm.
Hey, Ralph, what's, to follow up on Jay's question as far as ethnic composition and some, alliances with Russia from Belarus, what about the economic factor? I understand Russia is about 50% of the economy with Belarus. And how difficult would that be to either sever ties or certainly at least alter ties to Russia?
You can't alter ties, or downright sever. You could have an embargo per se on the potash, which is one of the main resources in Belarus. Those kind of sanctions in order to bring about some sort of economic and democratic reform within the country. I think there are already sanctions against Belarus that will affect their economy. The resources, the potash, which is one of the main resources that gets extracted. What you've got to look at is can they diversify and work with the U.S. and or China, which is probably what they would have to do, moving away from Russia. But they could never truly sever ties, I don't think, with Russia.
Well, to follow up
Right on the border.
Tim's point, what about oil and gas and fuel? It's colder still in Belarus than it is in Ukraine. It's further north.
Yeah.
And that means that Belarus must be heating themselves with Russian oil and gas. If Putin decides to play that card, he could put, additional pressure on them, no?
Yeah, he could. These are certainly strong possibilities. That's why it's so difficult to be able to enact any kind of meaningful reform. But I think everyone is confident that something positive will happen down the line. It all depends on the strength and the will of the Belarusian people and the strength and will of the Ukrainians to continue to fight, the Russians.
Let me throw one more in there just as a differential. Suppose Ukraine loses the war with Russia. Suppose Putin has his way with Ukraine, okay, which would be, just the worst possible case for the liberal world order and all that. But what happens to Belarus if Putin takes Ukraine?
If Putin takes Ukraine, Belarus is going to feel the Lukashenko is not going to engage with the West. He's going to feel that his bread and butter is with the Russians. So there'll be no incentive for him to do anything to cater to Western style of democracy. He's going to become even more authoritarian to hold on to his power.
And so that will be, the domino effect, won't it?
Yes.
Ukraine is at the head of the class here, and if Ukraine goes, there's all kinds of domino countries around in Eastern Europe that will fall in similar fashion, right?
Correct. Yes.
So, Ralph, who was anybody from state or executive branch at the press club this morning? What happened there, and what were the serious pleas of Valerie and Dmitry? Can you just repeat those again for us?
They want to make sure that the U.S. stays active and engaged in supporting sanctions against Belarus, against a president that has created a dictatorship. That is, there have been sham elections, and what they want is for the U.S. to support free and fair elections in Belarus, to support an opportunity for Belarusians in exile to be able to vote, when there is an actual election next year. So all Belarusians will have a vote, even if they're not, even if they're in exile. And he has a particular computer software program that he's discussed that will allow people to vote absentee overseas. And he's looking to build a strong synergy of activists, civil society experts, legal, scholarly experts to work, with the State Department, with the Biden administration, to, show that there is strong support for enacting democratic reforms in Belarus.
Yeah, but nobody is interested in having American troops go to Belarus or weapons go to Belarus or to supply any weapons to the Belarusian army, because that would probably fall into the hands of Putin.
Right, and that was not raised. That's not what they're asking for.
Tim, we're almost out of time. Can you go for a last round here with Ralph?
Well, yeah, sure. Ralph, what's your best estimation of the future for Belarus? I mean, what is the best possible outcome that you can imagine?
That there will be a new election next year that'll be transparent. There'll be an opportunity for all Belarusians to have their voice be heard, that there will be viable candidates that are allowed to run that won't be disqualified at the whim of the government, and the lessening of sanctions once there's a transparent democratic system in the country. That would be the very best case scenario. Yeah.
One last question. Are there political prisoners in Belarus right now?
Yes, in jail. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Valery talked about that as well at the press conference. They want to get their voices out. We actually gave them an award, recognizing the struggle for human rights and democracy, not only on behalf of Valery and Dmitry, but all the political prisoners that are being held in Belarus at this point.
Great. Thank you, Ralph.
Wow, it sounds like it's running a parallel to Navalny and all those people in Russia who have been arrested and jailed for protesting Putin's war.
So, very similar.
Yeah. Well, that means his whole playbook is similar, so we can expect more along the same lines. Stephanie, your last round with Ralph?
Oh, hey, Ralph, this Dmitry Volkanets, he was ambassador in 2000 and then left. Are they?
That's Valery Tsepkalo.
Oh, so okay, she was ambassador. Now, has Belarus had an ambassador since then, or they've been under that sanction?
No, they've been under sanctions. Yeah.
And that was because of what? Because that was long before the.
Because of the violations of international law. Sham elections and jailing of opposition. Yeah.
In tandem with Putin, right? Okay. Also, Pussy Riot leader was on one of the shows last night with Lawrence, Last Word, and she's evidently under assault, not under assault, but they're trying to get her to take her back to Russia and imprison her again. So she's trying to get at this thing through her art. So are there any of those kinds of activities going on from the Bell
in Belarus? Yes. Athletes who have spoken out against the government have been thrown in jail or forced into exile. You may have heard about the famous case where the Belarusian sprinter made some statements during the Olympics against the government of Belarus, and they were trying to forcibly take her home, and she sought asylum in Japan, and now she's living in Poland and trying to train and compete for the next Olympics. So the government of Belarus does not mess around. They, want to suppress all opposition.
I think it has to be clear, Ralph, that ThinkTech Hawaii is not going to open a bureau or branch office anywhere in Belarus for the foreseeable future.
Understood. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Ralph, your final words, take 1 minute and leave a message for our viewers about what's happening, how you feel about it.
It's very important to stay engaged, not only with what's going on in Ukraine, to help support the Ukrainian people in their endeavors who are willing to stand up and fight, and also recognize that the more and more democracy activists are being jailed and forced into exile out of Belarus, that the people are not necessarily in lockstep with Putin. It's going to take the support of the West to stand up and support people that are trying to promote meaningful change within Belarus, who want to see free markets and liberal democracy take hold in their country.
Great. Ralph, Winnie in Washington, our co-host Tim Apicella, Stephanie Stoll-Dalton, our contributor. Thank you so much to all of you for this very important discussion. We will follow it up, and soon. Thanks to all. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.